Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are immersing ourselves in the mind of St. Jerome, one of the most brilliant and, let's be honest, undeniably controversial early church fathers.
Absolutely. Controversial is definitely the word.
And the sources you've provided, they highlight this stunning theological tension right at the core of his work.
hmm
It seems his fierce, relentless arguments for the perpetual virginity of Mary and Joseph were driven by a single, profound, and, well, some might say extreme preference for celibacy over marriage.
It's the engine for so much of his thinking.
So our mission today, it goes beyond just documenting Jerome's arguments. We need to figure out not just what he argued, but why. Why did he pursue his position with such remarkable and often aggressive vehemence?
Right. What's underneath it all?
Exactly. We have to trace the path he took to reconcile his views on celibacy with God's commands back in Genesis to be fruitful and multiply, and that it was not good for man to be alone.
And this is really a deep dive into the architecture of theological thought itself. It reveals how deeply held priorities can fundamentally shape how you even read Scripture.
He wasn't just reading it, he was building a whole system with it.
He was building a hierarchy of spiritual states. And to start, we have to put his commitment in context. It wasn't just some personal quirk.
Okay.
His position was part of a wider trend, something we call early patristic valorization of continence.
Okay, let's unpack that phrase for a second. What does patristic valorization of continence actually mean for you, the listener?
It just means that many of the early church fathers felt that restraining oneself continence was the higher spiritual path, a sign of real spiritual maturity. But, and this is the key thing with Jerome, while many shared that general view, his rhetoric, especially against opponents like Jovinianus, was notably vehement. He was turning a preference into a mandate.
And who was this opponent, Jovinianus? Why did he provoke such an extreme reaction?
Jovinianus was the theological counterpoint. He was the one who dared to suggest that marriage and virginity were, in God's eyes, basically equal in merit.
And for Jerome, that was just unacceptable.
It was an unacceptable spiritual demotion. He saw the very idea of equating them as a threat to the highest Christian ideal.
Wow. So the vehemence wasn't just his personality, it was, defending the top rung of his spiritual ladder. And when he drew that contrast, he really didn't pull any punches, did he?
He was brutal, absolutely. Jerome repeatedly insisted that virginity surpassed marriage and merit. He portrayed it as the higher path to heaven.
And he contrasted the palm of chastity, which is beautiful imagery,
It is.
with what he just dismissively called sexual indulgence. You can almost feel the scorn in that phrasing.
You can. And it wasn't just a debate for him, it was a crucial warning.
Yeah.
He was genuinely asserting that those who choose marital embraces cannot reign with Christ among virgins and widows.
So he's connecting your marital status directly to your place in heaven.
Directly. He even used one of the most powerful parables. He likened choosing marriage to choosing the rich man's fleeting earthly pleasures, and he contrasted that with Lazarus, who gets the eternal reward.
That is not a subtle critique. That's basically saying marriage, if you're not careful, could risk your salvation.
It risks it, absolutely, if it's not approached with the most profound ascetic restraint.
But wait, if he's calling sex a concession to weakness and essentially equating the marital state with the doomed rich man, wasn't that dangerous? How did he stop his followers from just abandoning marriage entirely? Society needs it.
That's the tension he was always navigating. He had to affirm that marriage was good, because Scripture says so, and the church needs it to continue.
Right.
But he immediately subordinated it. It was good, but maybe as a kind of necessary evil, a safety valve against fornication, a pass for the weak. Virginity was the goal of perfection.
And he needed a perfect model for this perfection, the Holy Family.
Absolutely. He argued Christ, Mary, and the apostles, who he claims were either virgins or lived celibate after marriage, they modeled virginity as the first fruits for both sexes. They set the standard.
And this preference, it also dictated the structure of the church he wanted to see.
It did. He had very specific, very strict requirements for the clergy.
How strict are we talking?
He required that bishops, priests, and deacons had to be virgins or widowers, or at the very least, be vowed to perpetual chastity once they were ordained.
And the reasoning behind that?
His core reasoning was practical but elevated. They must abstain forever to be able to pray without marital distraction. Those who serve the altar have to be continuously pure, not burdened by, a spouse.
It's fascinating that the sources point out his disparaging expressions toward marriage got him in trouble. He even had to issue apologies.
He did, like the one to Pimachius. He must have known he was pushing the boundary. But he couldn't back down from the framework. The core idea was always there. The marital bed was an interruption to spiritual readiness.
So sex within marriage was, at best, tolerated. A concession to weakness.
Never celebrated as an equal good.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Let's connect that severe worldview to the specific Bible interpretations we know him for. His belief in celibacy's superiority directly framed his arguments against another opponent, Helvidius.
This is the absolute crux of the matter. Helvidius argued that, based on the Gospels mentioning Jesus' brethren—
The brothers and sisters, yeah.
Exactly. He argued Mary must have had other children after Jesus. But for Jerome, this was an existential theological crisis.
Why a crisis?
Because if the Mother of God resumed marital relations, she would be demonstrating that the highest state, virginity, was temporary. It would devalue the whole celibate path he was championing against Jovinianus.
So this wasn't just a debate about family history.
Not at all.
He was defending his entire ascetic worldview. To win against Jovinianus, he had to win against Helvidius.
Precisely. The theological stakes were just incredibly high for him here. He needed to prove Mary was the perpetual model of purity. So he put together this series of really powerful exegetical counter-arguments against the plain reading of the text.
Okay, let's start with that tricky phrase in Matthew where Joseph knew her not till the birth of Jesus. To most people, that word till sounds like they did resume relations later.
Right, it seems to imply a change. But Jerome argued that the use of till wasn't meant to suggest that at all.
What did he say it meant?
He said it was just there to emphasize the sanctity of the miraculous birth. It was a statement of divine protection up to that moment, with the implication that the virginal relationship was permanent. He even cited other Bible verses where until doesn't mean an action starts afterward.
Okay. And what about Jesus being the firstborn? That seems to naturally imply a secondborn, a thirdborn?
He had a quick answer for that, too. He argued firstborn could just as easily apply to an only child.
How so?
It refers to the child who opens the womb, regardless of whether other children follow. It's more of a legal or ritualistic term, not necessarily a sequential one.
And then the big one, those brethren, the brothers, he had to make them disappear, theologically speaking.
He did. He insisted they couldn't be Mary's other children. They had to be cousins, or, even more conveniently, Joseph's children from a prior marriage that's never mentioned.
A theory that was already out there, right?
There's a common interpretation in the East, yeah.
Yeah.
And it worked perfectly for him. It removed any evidence of marital relations between Mary and Joseph.
But the most shocking thing he did, I think, was to extend this virginity ideal to Joseph himself. That's not something you find in Scripture.
No, that's where you see the ideal driving the interpretation most dramatically. Jerome made the boldest claim of all. Joseph himself was a virgin. He says, and I'm quoting here, "You say that Mary did not continue a virgin. I claim still more that Joseph himself, on account of Mary, was a virgin."
So that from a virgin wedlock, a virgin son was born. A virgin wedlock that redefines marriage completely. It's not about procreation. It's a vow of perpetual mutual continence.
It is. It completely elevates the holiness of the family unit and makes them the ultimate ascetic example. Joseph's holiness, Jerome reasoned, well, it precluded fornication, and since Scripture doesn't mention other wives,
the silence becomes the proof.
The silence becomes the proof of his virginity. And to really cement Mary's unique state, Jerome used these powerful, almost poetic, typological arguments.
What exactly is a typological argument?
It means he was using powerful symbols from the Old Testament to define her holiness. For example, he called her womb a garden enclosed, a fountain sealed, which is from the Song of Solomon.
The imagery there is one of perfect preservation, untouchable.
Exactly. And the East Gate analogy, that's still so well known today.
Yeah, from the book of Ezekiel.
Right. The gate through which the Lord passes, but it remains shut. It implies she remained eternally consecrated. He mined every single textual resource to prove that the Mother of God must exemplify the superior life no matter what.
And the sources confirm he explicitly linked all of this back to his fight with Jovinianus.
He did. He argued that upholding Mary's virginity was necessary to avoid having striven in vain against Jovinian's eloquence. It was all connected.
This brings us right to the central challenge, the one you asked us to address at the start. Did Jerome just forget about Genesis? I mean, how did a Bible scholar of his stature confront Genesis 1.28, be fruitful and multiply, and Genesis 2.18, not good for man to be alone? It seems to completely contradict his entire premise.
He didn't forget, not at all. But he certainly performed some sophisticated theological gymnastics to reframe them, he tackled both commands directly in his work against Jovinianists.
So he separated the creation story into phases.
Exactly. He argued that Adam and Eve were created male and female, but, and this is key, he insisted they remained perfect virgins in paradise before the fall.
What?
Their first perfect state was one of pure, non-sexual companionship, like the angels.
So marriage and the command to procreate only began after they were expelled from paradise, after corruption entered the world.
That is his essential argument. He saw the command to be fruitful as a post-fall concession to human weakness and, crucially, to compensate for mortality. Since we now die, we have to reproduce.
So it's a secondary command necessitated by sin.
Yes, and that fundamentally changes the stakes. If virginity mimics the original pre-fall state perfection, then it has to be superior to marriage, which is just a consequence of our failure.
Virginity becomes a way to restore humanity to its ideal, unfallen state.
It mimics the perpetual incorruption of paradise. And that allows Jerome to argue that the celibate life is superior even to the fruitful lives of the great patriarchs, like Abraham.
And what about the loneliness problem? God himself said it was not good to be alone. How does the biggest proponent of solitude deal with that?
He spiritualized it. Jerome saw companionship as being fulfilled not through a carnal union with a spouse, but spiritually within the church.
The union of Christ and the church.
Right, a spiritual oneness that doesn't require physical union. Loneliness for him was redefined as spiritual separation from God, not the absence of a wife.
And to really drive this all home, he went straight to the New Testament, right? Using St. Paul.
He did. 1 Corinthians 7:1, "It is good for a man not to touch a woman." That verse was his hammer. He used Paul's words to ask this powerful rhetorical question about marital sex.
What was the question?
He asks, "What I pray you is the quality of that good thing which hinders prayer."
Oof. That is devastatingly effective. If marriage is good, but the intimacy in marriage stops you from achieving the highest good constant prayer, then it must be subordinate.
Exactly. He affirmed marriage was good, but only as a subordinate necessity. He constantly pointed out that even marital intimacy requires a break from prayer, and crucially, it hinders full participation in the Eucharist.
So perpetual continence means perpetual readiness for the divine.
And therefore, it's the superior way of life.
This whole polemical approach, this complete reframing of creation, of the Holy Family, it must have had immense staying power to survive those debates.
It did. Jerome's arguments weren't just his own ideas in a vacuum. They became deeply entrenched in the ascetic, patristic consensus across the entire early church. He was backed by heavyweights like Ambrose in the West and Eastern fathers like John Damascene.
And despite his harsh style, his conclusions about Mary became foundational dogma.
They absolutely did. His conclusions, especially the perpetual virginity of Mary, influenced centuries of doctrine and were formally affirmed as Catholic dogma by the Lateran Council in 649.
And it's still in the modern catechism. It just shows the long-term power of an interpretation when it's rooted in such a strong theological ideal.
It really does.
The sources do offer a crucial note on balance, though, which is important. While Jerome championed this hierarchy, the final codified doctrine today has a more nuanced view of marriage.
That's right. While Jerome, struggled to praise marriage without adding a but, the formalized church teaching today views marriage as a true sacrament. It's honorable.
But consecrated virginity still has a special place.
It does. It retains a distinct, elevated role. It's seen as symbolizing the church as the ultimate bride of Christ.
A supernatural fruitfulness.
Exactly. It transcends biological procreation. So the church basically preserved Jerome's high ideal, that pursuit of the unfallen state, while also making sure marriage retained its sacramental dignity, something Jerome often, let's say, neglected in the heat of his fight with Jovinianists.
So what does this whole deep dive mean for us as we read these texts? Jerome wasn't just expressing a personal preference. He was building this vast, sophisticated theological framework where celibacy was the highest aspiration. So central that he had to retrofit the creation story at the very beginning of the Bible just to support it.
It's an incredible example of how a profound theological commitment can drive aggressive and highly creative scriptural interpretation.
It really is.
But what's particularly fascinating here, and this is something for you to take away as you approach any complex ancient text, is how often Jerome prioritized scriptural silence. What the text didn't say.
Right, you mentioned that with Joseph.
Exactly. He assumed Joseph was a virgin because we do not read about his marital relations. He used that absence of evidence, that silence, as proof for his conclusion.
while at the same time having to argue against the literal reading of verses that were actually there, like
Yeah.
firstborn or the brethren.
Precisely. And this raises a really important question for you to consider. When you're reading any complex foundational text, how often do we see authors relying on the absence of evidence what the text is silent about to support a desired conclusion versus directly engaging with the textual obstacles they are trying to overcome? That's something to mull over long after this deep dive is done.